Hello, welcome back to Big Fellas. How you doing, Darren? You right, mate?
Yeah, I'm really good. Thanks, Mark. How are you?
I'm good, mate. We've got a big one today. We've got local MP, Ben Obese-Jecty. So I'm really excited for this. But before we get started, we do have a discount code that we like to push, don't we?
We do. We do this very quickly because Ben, as an MP, is a very busy man. So let's just do this quickly. So look, we do Big Fellas. We at Big Fellas do Man v Fat. We love it. It's great. It's brilliant for our weight loss journey. And our discount code upon sign up is Big Fellas. And that saves you £9 off your sign up fee.
Sign up for £1. Brilliant. Anyway, we'll talk about more in another episode, but let's just jump straight in and welcome Ben Obese-Jecty to the podcast. How you doing, Ben? You all right?
Not too bad, thanks. Thanks for having me on. Pleasure to be here.
We're delighted to have you on. Thank you. So you are our local MP for Huntingdon. So, yeah, we're delighted to have you on. But let's start off first. We understand that you do have a military background and now find your way as our local MP. Tell us a bit about the story and the background of that.
So it's been it feels like a long time now since I left the army, but I joined the army way back in 2004. I actually joined the army. I remember the day I signed up to join the army. That was back in the day when we used to have actual physical recruitment offices. There aren't many of those left anymore. And my local recruitment office was in central London at the time. So I was sat in the recruitment office, the one just off the Strand, so right next to Trafalgar Square. And it was just after Iraq had been invaded. And so on the TV screen in the corner, we were watching the invasion of Iraq go on whilst signing up to join the army, which is quite a bizarre experience. You're literally watching on television the shock and awe of the sort of the planes and missiles going in, and also sit there in front of a recruiting sergeant saying, I would like to do what's on TV right now. So slightly bizarre experience, but it takes a little while to get into the army, sort of 9 months of back and forth and interviews and selection meetings. And then I was lucky enough to be selected for officer training and went to the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst in January 2004. Spent a year there, then commissioned into the Duke of Wellington's Regiment, which is an infantry regiment based in the West Riding of Yorkshire. At the time, it's now part of the Royal Yorkshire Regiment, but it's set in the West Riding. And I joined them because I played a lot of rugby at the time, and they were the infantry battalion to go and sort of speak to and join if you played rugby. So they won the Army Cup more times than any other battalion. So that was a sort of a fantastic. You end up joining a regiment which you feel a connection to, and I think at an officer's mess that you feel you fit into, and that was the one that of all the visits that I conducted, that was where I felt most comfortable. So I was lucky. They it's a bit like a date, really. Not only do you say I'd like to join, they also have to like you back. So I was lucky enough that they thought I was all right. So I managed to sneak in there, and then spent my career in the infantry, in the Dukes, and then when it got changed into Yorkshire Regiment in 2006 as well, but some fantastic opportunities. Got to travel to some far-flung places, sort of spent time on operations in Basra in Iraq, and also in Sangin in Afghanistan on two quite difficult tours. And there was plenty of other opportunities as well. Spent time training recruits, sort of instructing people in anti-tank weapons. That was my specialisation, and also got to do a bit of sport as well. And being a fitness podcast, got some real opportunities there to obviously play rugby, as I mentioned, but also the army taught me how to snowboard, and I was lucky enough to get good enough at that I made it into the army team for snowboarding, which is something that the army probably don't do enough advertising of. But also they taught me how to ski, how to skydive, how to scuba dive. So there were some real opportunities to go to some pretty incredible places and learn how to do those things. So yeah, that was probably my army career in a nutshell.
Fantastic. And so then how did you transfer into politics then?
Well, it took a while, to be honest. When I was in the army, I was never, despite the fact that you're doing things that are overtly very, very political in terms of the decisions that are taken by politicians dictate what the army then goes and does. But I was never hugely political when I was in the army. It's much easier to not be political when you're in the army because you have to do things whatever, and so there's no point in spending too long dwelling over the ins and outs of why something, or whether you agree or disagree with why you have to do something, given you have to do it anyway, and you have to be able to sell that to the guys. It is best that you are able to tell them exactly why they're going, and be able to explain it in those terms, as opposed to putting too much of your own spin or your own opinion on it. And so I left the army. I decided to try and use my degree and my accountancy qualification, and so sort of moved into financial services. Realised fairly early on that wasn't really for me, and that I really missed the feeling of being part of something bigger, of feeling like you were going to make a difference, that you were going to play a small part in something that mattered. And I found that working in financial services and being a cog in a big corporate machine was fine, paid well, but it wasn't really something that made my heart sing. And so sort of about halfway through my financial services career, through local politics, really, just through being annoyed about things not going well at a local level, fly tipping, things like that. I lived in North London at the time, and realised that actually, if I wanted to do something about this, then I probably had to actually put myself forward and sort of get into politics. And so you start by dipping your toe in the water and just thinking like, oh, this is interesting. And the next thing you know, you're standing against Diane Abbott in a general election, and having angry people in Hackney shout at you and throw your leaflets back in your face. And somehow off the back of that and getting a good shellacking in that election, still decided that this is something I wanted to go on and continue to do. And so it probably took about 5 or 6 years of sort of hard work getting into a position where you would then get selected as a candidate. And I was fortunate enough to be selected as a Conservative candidate for Huntingdon back in 2023, and then spent a long time campaigning as to why people should vote for me. So it's a much harder process. It's different for every party, but it's a much harder process than I think most people realise. I don't think any of the political parties do a particularly good job of explaining how people become members of parliament and the pathway that people take. And no matter which route you take, unless you are very, very lucky, it probably took an awful lot of time and probably an awful lot of your own money in order to be able to stand as a member of parliament. So yeah, there's probably quite a lot to unpack there for all the parties.
So Ben, you said about wanting to affect change, and obviously government is pretty much probably the best way of doing that, right? It's very important. But what is it that you want to change the most? Is there something that's is there a big thing for you?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I'm a backbench opposition MP, so you don't come much, and I'm new. You don't come much lower in the pecking order of having an impact than being the new guy and the opposition benches without a punchy job. So there's a limit to how much you can probably achieve in this position, but at the same time you can certainly give it a really good go. And whilst I'm probably going to have limited impact on sort of massive, big strategic visions, there are smaller things that you can begin to pick off. So campaigns you can fight on locally for your constituents, everything from stopping a big solar farm from being built in next to one of your villages to making sure that the hospital gets rebuilt. Those are the kind of the bread and butter MP things. And then you've got your personal, I hesitate to use the word hobby horse because it sounds as if it's a negative, and it's quite self-indulgent. But the other elements that you care about a lot, that you have time and the platform to be able to influence. So I have 2 of those at the moment. I have knife crime is something that I would really like to tackle, particularly knife crime amongst children. I think it's a disgrace as to how little focus we as a country put on the fact that so many children are now prepared to carry knives, and worse than that, prepared to use knives on other children. And so I led the first debate that we've had this parliament actually on knife crime in the main chamber, and it's called a backbench business committee debate. So you as a backbencher get to bid for a topic. You have to get cross-party support. So you have to get other MPs to sign to say that they think it's a good idea, just to make sure it's not a party political issue. And then we had a debate in the chamber about knife crime amongst children and young people. And I appreciate that isn't going to stop that overnight, and that isn't going to change anything, but it means that it has been debated in Parliament. I had a 20-minute speech to be able to put across what I think is going wrong, or how I think we can change it, and why I think it's important. And that was really important to me. That was something that I always felt that I was going to put forward when I was a candidate. I always thought if I was an MP, that's something that I would love to be able to try and make a difference on. And the other one, I have a what's called a 10-minute rule bill. So it's like a bit like a private member's bill. Effectively, you get the opportunity to put forward a bill that you would like to propose. It's a bit performative in that whatever you put forward, the government are always going to say, no thanks very much. We've got a lot of other legislation to put through, but you get to it becomes a real bill that effectively goes on the order paper and gives you an opportunity to use that to try and influence change. Mine is interpersonal abuse, tackling interpersonal abuse against men and boys. Men and boys currently are included within the violence against women and girls strategy. They don't have their own strategy to tackle that kind of abuse. So men who are the victim of rape, sexual assault, domestic abuse, forced marriage, honour-based violence, I propose that we have a separate strategy to make sure that the male survivors of those crimes get their own effective strategy to be able to make sure they get the support that they need. And so that's currently on the order paper at the moment, and I'm currently trying to put pressure on the government to make sure that when they rewrite the violence against women and girls strategy this summer, that they do a separate strategy for men. And if I can achieve that, I'll be extremely pleased. That was another thing that I felt that I wanted to tackle. But I appreciate those are quite heavy topics for what is hopefully quite a bit of a more light-hearted podcast.
Yeah, of course. So you're in a high pressure job, and I think a lot of the people that we sort of reach out to will probably be in high pressure jobs and maybe almost use that as an excuse for sort of their weight or their lack of fitness. And obviously someone who's quite sporty and served in the army, how would a guy like yourself keep fit, and how do you personally keep fit, like sort of putting up with a high pressure job?
So yeah, I'm more time poor now than I've ever been in my entire life. I mean, I work harder now than I did when I was in the army, even including being on operations. So I just have almost no free time. And every time as a politician, when you turn on the television, turn on the news, and whatever the lead story is directly going to affect your next day at work. So you're never really turned off. Every time you pick up your phone, there's something going on. And so I don't get much time, but I love doing exercise, and I hate feeling like I'm not in good shape. And so I do try and go to the gym as much as I can. I try and go every day, and that for me involves getting up at a silly time to get to the gym as it opens before work. So I will get up every day at 5:15, and then I get out of the house by 25 to 6, get on the first tube, and then try and get to the gym in sort of near Parliament by 6:30 in the morning when it opens. And then I get the opportunity then to have sort of an hour and a half of doing a good workout. And it helps clear the mind. It just helps me feel like I've done something. I spend the rest of the day eating pretty average beige food. And as a result of that, sort of diet goes out the window. You spend a lot of time snacking, a lot of time eating unhealthy stuff. Every reception you go to, there's sort of or crisps, or someone will give you a really warm glass of cheap white wine, and just that all of those things are really poor. You know, I try to remember to drink water. I don't drink anywhere near enough of it, even though it's sat on my desk all day, because you're just constantly in and out of the office. And so trying to make sure that you get that balance right is really, really tricky. And the only way that I feel I can do that is by doing it first thing in the morning, so it's out of the way, and then you've got the rest of the day to be able to do your work and focus on things. When it comes to the weekends, I'm a really keen cyclist. It's something I've always been into, but really got back into it over lockdown when you weren't allowed to do anything else, but you could go out and ride on your bikes for miles and miles and miles on your own. And I really got back into that. And now on weekends, I try to get out again early in the morning and just get out and do sort of anything from 30 to 50 kilometers. But it's just that feeling of getting out, some fresh air. I definitely know the weekends when I haven't been able to do it, because I feel a little bit why happy, a bit stir crazy, and feel like I haven't really gone out and done something. So that's a favourite of mine. I'm a fair weather cyclist, though, so I won't, if it's raining, I won't go out because it's so miserable. But I'll try and do something like skipping in the garden or something like that, just to make sure that I've done something, feel like I've ticked that box.
Yeah. So Ben, we probably should bring it on to the politics side of weight loss, I suppose. So, you know, just a couple of stats that we've sort of researched. You know, about 64% of people in the UK are either overweight or obese. I think about 26% of them are considered obese, and that has a huge cost. So, in terms of premature deaths, they say obesity contributes to about 40,000 deaths a year in the UK. It costs the NHS about £6.5 billion. It costs the overall economy up to just under 100 billion a year, 98 billion a year. You know, if you're obese, you're far more likely to be off sick and stuff like that. You know, I appreciate this maybe isn't the always on people's minds, but it's huge, isn't it? I think obesity, and it's something there to be tackled. I feel certainly. What are your thoughts?
And I think one of the problems we've got, we're probably as a society less active now than we ever have been before. You know, increasingly fewer and fewer jobs involve manual work. More and more jobs are sedentary. We spend, I'm guilty of this as well, spend way too much time on my phone, way too much time sat in front of a screen, be that a laptop or a television or an iPad. And I think that sort of the kind of the demise of, you know, you guys, I feel like you guys are probably about the same age, a similar age to me. You know, when I was a kid, you went out and you played football with your mates, and you ran around loads, you climbed trees, and you went out on your bike for all day and rode miles and miles and miles. I used to do a paper round. My paper round was 8 miles a day, and that just stuff like that. That stuff doesn't seem to really exist anymore. Kids don't play with toys in the garden. They play on phones and play on video games. And I'm not saying we didn't have video games when I was younger, but waiting for that floppy disk to load was meant that it was a much less instantly gratifying process. But I think we've kind of, as a society, we're slowly moving away from that kind of outdoor experience, and that isn't true everywhere. If you've spent any time in somewhere like Scandinavia, they still have a really active outdoor lifestyle, and I think in the UK we've kind of lost that. And we don't do nearly enough of it. And I mean, that isn't to say that you can easily compare it to Scandinavia. We don't have mountains and amazing countryside to go cross-country skiing in, but we still could spend more time kicking a ball around in a park, and I think we probably need to encourage people to do a bit more of that. That in addition to diet. I've never really been one for things like sugar taxes. I feel that there is I'm a conservative, so I believe in personal responsibility. So I think people do have it upon themselves to eat as healthily as they can. That said, my own diet is not great, and I eat far too much sugar. I've got a real sweet tooth, but I recognise that I try and balance that out with doing exercise. I think we probably just need to educate people a bit more. I totally wouldn't object to not that I'm going to propose it, but teaching kids more about nutrition at school would be a good idea. And I don't know how you would ever achieve it, but I dare say that teaching children how to cook would be a really sensible option, because I think too many people get to adulthood without having learned how to cook. I didn't learn to cook until I came out of the army. I didn't learn to cook when I was a kid. I didn't have to. I joined the army pretty soon after university, and then all my meals were cooked for me or boiled in a bag on rations. And it wasn't until I left the army that I actually had to fend for myself properly. And then suddenly you start to think, oh, how do you boil pasta? Just really basic stuff like that. And so that is. Those are the basics I think would be really useful. I experienced that. I used to, before I became an MP, I did some time working in my local food bank, and I found that one of the things, really striking things there, was when you gave out food parcels, people would give you food back to say, I don't know how to cook this, so I don't want it. And that was really striking to me, because we didn't have a lot of money when I was a kid. My family spent a period of time where we were homeless, and I know at that stage that I was in no position to go, oh, actually, I won't eat that because I don't know how to cook it. I was keen to eat whatever we had, because that was all we had. And so I find it interesting that people are in a position where they don't feel they can cook something and wouldn't even entertain looking up how to cook it. And so I think just teaching people as much as we can around nutrition, food, what you can do with stuff, how to be inventive, would be making food interesting is probably a key element of making people then want to eat things like broccoli.
Yeah.
But yeah.
It's I totally agree with you. I'm a big believer in free market as well, and I think there has to be an element here of personal responsibility. But then obviously we try and help that as much as possible, I think is the objective, I suppose. But I suppose the thing that concerns me the most is around things like food regulation. Mm-hmm. And the amount of ultra processed food and the effort that's going into that, I suppose. Do you think there's some sort of sway there with your sort of conservative values, if you like?
Yeah, I think it's difficult because there's loads of stuff that is ultra processed that we don't consider to be ultra processed. Bread would be a really good example of that. In terms of it being ultra processed, and you would assume that bread was healthy to a certain extent. I think all the drinks that we drink that are zero sugar, they might have no sugar in them, but they're still sweet. You have to ask how they can make something. Water is natural, it isn't sweet. Zero sugar fizzy drinks, I won't mention any brands, but zero sugar fizzy drinks are sweet somehow. So those types of things, we probably need to start thinking about how to move away from those, and I'm loath to make them inaccessible to people, but I think we also need to think about how we can encourage people to do things like drink more water, make sure you flush your kidneys out like on a regular basis, pee clear once a day. It's a good mantra, it's a good habit to get into as well. And I think those ultra processed foods are going to cause an awful lot of longer term health problems that we're storing up. We're at an age where we didn't grow up eating that stuff all the time. or probably didn't eat it all the time, and there are children who are growing up now who have diets that are mostly comprised of food like that. By the time they get to our age, there are going to be sort of longer term problems settling, and or some really bad habits that are going to be really difficult to shake. And that isn't just a weight problem, that's also a dental problem as well. You know, we've seen the stories of the lack of dentists available and the poor quality of children's teeth. You know, there's a growing problem there, and if it's doing that to their teeth, then it's probably not having a great effect on their insides as well.
We'll just say on that, though, Ben. I will just say on that, I obviously live in your constituency, and I've just found myself an NHS dentist. I was like, yes. There you go.
Well, yeah, either tell everyone or don't tell everyone, depending on where you sit on that.
Not telling me.
But congratulations.
Thank you. That was so awesome. Brilliant.
Brilliant. Do you think men's health, and particularly obesity, gets enough attention with public policy?
I don't actually. I think men get a bit of a raw deal. I'm not one of those people who's going to sit here and suggest that men are the most hard done by group on earth. I do think that there is, on the one hand, I do think people tend to just assume we'll be okay. I think men's mental health is a great example of that. And then on the other hand, I think that there is a stigma attached to being a man and addressing those issues. You know, I think there's a stigma attached to asking for help as a man, or that being perceived as some form of weakness, that therefore, you know, it's a bit like men not crying. Actually, terrible things happen all the time, and actually having a good cry is probably good for you every now and again. And I think men's health, and particularly sort of obesity within the sort of the men's health bracket is a really, really important point. That, you know, we just you know, even stuff about dad bods, it's a case of saying, well actually, you know, maybe we should just be encouraging people that whilst it's fine that, you know, it's fine to not be, you know, we're not expecting everyone to be chiseled with you know, rippling abs, etc. But at the same time, we should maybe be giving people all the encouragement they can to get up, move around, you know, reduce your chances of developing those long-term serious illnesses that come with just doing a little bit of exercise, just walking instead of driving, etc., etc. These are all great things that we can do that will sort of that aggregation of marginal gains, if you like, all those 1% add up over time to being quite a big chunk. And I think encouraging men to take ownership of those things is really important. You know, we probably all drink too much and eat too much of the wrong food, and that sort of that culture of that being normal and not doing you any harm probably is something we need to sort of slightly tackle. I mean, it's striking how few people smoke these days, for example, and that's as a result of a massive campaign to try and reduce the number of people who do smoke. And now, if you look amongst young people, barely any young people smoke realistically compared to when I was a teenager. Certainly, numbers were already falling then. So I think the men's health element is something that we do need to look at, and I think we do need to continue to encourage men to take ownership of getting as fit and healthy as they can, not just so that they can live long and happy lives, you know, especially, you know, men that are dads, men that have, you know, people who depend upon them. Those people want you to stick around, and making sure that those people live healthy and happy lives is really important. And I think just people who've got a voice and a platform, you know, and weirdly I now include myself within that, I think it's sort of on us to be able to be honest about those things and speak out about them. I mean, from a slightly different men's health perspective, prostate cancer is something that I think is really interesting. You know, I have family members who have it. I get myself checked regularly, like once a year. You know, I've had the blood test, I've had the finger as well, but it's something that had a real stigma attached to it. I think things like the King being affected by it, like Chris Hoy's diagnosis, you know, that you know, he's someone who everyone knows, and he's fit and he's healthy and he's strong, and it can happen to him, it can happen to anyone. And I think just making sure that people know that this is something that can affect you or will affect you and maybe some of your mates, then maybe just getting checked out once a year and getting a blood test isn't the worst thing in the world. And I think just destigmatizing a lot of that stuff and getting people into the habit is just a really good thing to promote. So I'm a member of the all-party parliamentary group on prostate cancer. So within Parliament, I'm one of the people who pushes it and sort of lobbies for better testing, etc. And I think that's something that you know, hopefully will have an effect in time and make sure that people are in as good a position as they can be.
No, I love that. And I think it's so important, like I said, it's just about talking more. And on issues like that, it's talking. And I've been through some rough points in quite recently and over the years in that. And someone always just said, look, don't be afraid to talk. You just need to talk to people just to sort of overcome these things. Like I said, had that stigma, had that stiff upper lip, and had that I manage this all on my own, and you can't. You do need people around you to have that sort of to have your back and reach out to.
I totally agree. I think to put it bluntly, I think everybody probably could do with some therapy. And I think I spent time talking to professionals, and it really helps. It really helps you get on top of some of those things that you realize that you are never going to get on top of those all on your own, just like left to your own thoughts, and actually talking it through with anybody, just someone who'll listen, just helps you. Just you do end up getting to the answers yourself, and I think that's a really important thing to do. You just need to have the time and the space to be able to actually discuss it and work it through and think about it with a sort of step outside yourself for a minute and think like, why is this affecting me? How is this affecting me? I think that element of mental health provision, I think we're getting much better at it, as a society, as a sex, as a gender, we are getting much better at it. We just need to make sure that just everyone continues on like pushing on that, and we don't lose focus on being able to talk about it.
Absolutely. Well, Ben, I think we're nearly at the end of our time with you. I know you've got a few more appointments to get to, but thanks ever so much for coming on. And yeah, we look forward to seeing what you're going to do over the next 3 or 4 years.
Well, hopefully I managed to achieve a few things. But no, thank you so much for inviting me on. Really feel privileged. First podcast I've done, actually. So you can also to get that accolade as well. So, but it's been really great to be able to talk to you guys and be able to hopefully influence some people to take care of themselves.
That's right. Well, if you ever get anything weight loss related in the future, come back onto the podcast and we'll have a proper chat about it.
I'd love to.
Nice one. Cheers, Ben.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ben.